The Buddha gave so many teachings about avoidance of conflict, how to live harmoniously, how to live peacefully. And they're so relevant and so practical for us in an everyday sense. And there's one sutta I was just looking at recently in the Majjhima Nikaya, the Exposition of non-conflict. And this is one that we'll be looking at. It's 139 for anyone who wants to look it up, 139. And I've been really contemplating the teachings in this particular sutta. They're so amazing. How to behave in a way that's non-conflicting or not a cause of conflict, both for ourselves and also for the people around us. And the Buddha, he talks about how we're programmed, as we know, to react to pleasant and unpleasant experiences, pleasant and unpleasant feelings. And we tend to pursue pleasure, or sometimes we pursue pain. For some people, that's what they do. And this is often people who are, intent on some kind of purification or some kind of spiritual evolution. And there can be a way of practicing that can be actually quite painful. And it's not uncommon at all. In the time of the Buddha, it wasn't uncommon. And in the present day, it's not uncommon either. For us to not quite get, what's the best way to work with this one. So we can get into a kind of punishing or a harsh attitude towards our personalities or towards our what we perceive as faults, the ways in which we fall short. We feel that we fall short, and we can judge ourselves and blame ourselves and so forth. And even more dramatically, we can actually do painful practices. We can hurt the body, torture the body in different ways, and torture the mind in different ways by pursuing practices that we're really forcing ourselves to, give things up or let things go. Oh, I'm gonna let go. We make ourselves, force ourselves in ways that are harmful for us. And it's actually a very fine balance. So there's the extremes, like the Buddha spoke about when he was really describing his own path of practice as the Bodhisattva, where he was pursuing all sorts of very ascetic practices, and he discovered, the unbeneficial, sadly, the fact that these things didn't work. So in his teaching and in this sutta, he mentions this, and he says, we need to be careful to steer our course between the very ascetic way of being, forcing renunciation or really giving ourselves a very hard time, and then also indulgence, of course, in sense desires, which is the other extreme, where we can get caught up, we can get lost in pleasure, sense pleasures. And I'm sure we all know this one. I mean, getting into all sorts of wonderful ways of enjoying life. There's nothing terrible about that, but it can be a distraction for us. I used to live in New Zealand, and when I went to New Zealand, I was quite a determined meditator. I used to meditate 2-3 hours a day, and I was really interested in the spiritual path and the Buddhist teachings. And then I landed in New Zealand, and wow, New Zealand was so beautiful. There's so much to see and do, and every spare moment that we had, my ex-partner and I would be out, and it was great. We're out in nature. We were really living a very good life. It was just going walking and just totally enjoying the beauty, the unspoilt beauty, and exploring these islands. But I stopped meditating. There's no time for that. And it's quite interesting because it sort of faded away. My sense of spiritual practice just sort of faded away. And it's interesting to reflect back on that time because, actually there was nothing It was completely blameless lifestyle, and it was wonderful to enjoy nature, and like here in Camel, there's so much beautiful nature all around. It's very good for the heart, isn't it? It's really good for us to be out in nature and just to be part of that, let go into that, But there has to be the right sort of balance. And I lost the balance at some point there. Because I was just relishing the sense pleasures, what I was seeing, hearing, tasting as well, smelling, the kind of immersion in that place that I just so loved. And it's interesting that it had to come to an end, and that's the thing, isn't it, with sense pleasures and all the good things that we can experience in life, they do come to an end. And this is the problem. If they didn't, it would be fine. There would be no need, in a way, to question further. And this is a danger that higher beings have, we're told. If we're living in the higher planes of existence where there's so much bliss and pleasure perpetually, or so it seems, because the lifespan can be very, very long. And so this is something that can happen for us in the human realm too. We can experience a lot of pleasure, a lot of happiness, and we can forget that it might come to an end at some point. And so, as the Buddha said, this is the danger and the reality. So, this time for me in New Zealand came to an end because my ex-partner, his father got dementia, and his mother was struggling, It was very difficult. And so we had to go back and help out, and it was good. I mean, we wanted to do that. There was no question about that, but it was very hard to leave paradise, as I felt, paradise. It was very difficult to leave. And I cried. And I cried, oh no. But then we came back to the UK and I started suffering. Oh, suffering. Oh, I remember now. Oh yeah, there's this side of life as well. And through that suffering and feeling quite discontented, I remembered, oh, I used to meditate. That was quite helpful. And there were all these teachings that, gosh, they were so good, but I can't really remember them. And what amazes me is that I completely forgot. I actually completely forgot everything that I had learned over years. And this meditation practice that had been so beneficial for me, I'd completely forgotten. It's amazing. And so I went back to do a retreat after only 2.5 years of not doing retreats. I went back to do a retreat and I'm sitting there thinking, this is unbelievable. How could I forget this? How could I have forgotten this? How could I have let this go? So I've had a very, for myself, a very powerful experience of how we can get lost in sense pleasures and the danger, because as soon as I started meditating again, I started to feel so much better and just realizing that it doesn't matter where we live. It's not about what's happening externally. Honestly, the real happiness, well-being comes from within, and I had completely forgotten that. So I'd started to rely on the place, and then of course when I lost that, I was really destabilized. I was really shaken and confused and unhappy. So then I could land again on solid ground, the real ground, which is the ground of mindfulness, ground of practice. And so in this sutta, the exposition of non-conflict, the Buddha says, the first thing we need to do to avoid conflict is to practice the middle way. And the conflict comes in where we're pursuing pleasure or pursuing pain. And in the pursuing of these kind of, in a way, like false paths, we will create conflict. We will create harm. And that's very interesting. There's another sutta, I can't remember which one, but not this one. another sutta in Majjhima Nikaya where the Buddha talks about how all the wars, all the harm and hurt and violence and aggression and power struggles and so forth in the world are due to greed. They're all due to the pursuit of sense pleasure. And it's really interesting just to consider that as a statement of truth. I leave it with you, that we can see how, it's some kind of wanting that creates the delusion that if I just plow into this country or grab what I want, all will be well. This is the right thing to do. This is we find reasons why we can excuse appalling, amazingly awful things, behaviors, actions, because the mind can become clouded by sense desires. And sense desire, wanting, carries along with it, doesn't it? Not wanting. If I want something, it's because I don't want something else. I want to get rid of something. If I can just get rid of that, then I'll get what I want. And so it goes. And so the hatred and the desire go together. And so the middle way is just to see that, isn't it? And where there's desire, we can start to recognize, well, there's also aversion in that. And both of them are suffering. It's all suffering. The pursuit is suffering. The movement away from contentment right now is suffering. The sense of something's missing that I have to get, suffering. And so to practice the middle way is the way of peace. And then the Buddha talks about the Eightfold Path in this sutta. So to practice the Eightfold Path, it's a path of peace. And we're not harming anybody. And almost most importantly, we're not harming ourselves. We've stopped harming ourselves. Because this is where the harm starts, isn't it? So it's when we're not really resting in our sense of well-being here that we will go out and make trouble, cause trouble elsewhere. And so, of course, we need to live, we need to eat, we need to have some sort of shelter. We have certain needs. And I think, for me, the interesting part of this is to consider how to skillfully relate to the world in terms of what I take, what I use, And the Buddha again and again praised frugality and renunciation. So I take that to heart and consider. As a bhikkhuni, it's not so difficult because we can't sort of get our hands on things, which is quite good, So there's always a pause, there's some kind of pause, there's some kind of reflection around what we take in and the sense of what we need. It's not like I haven't had the experience for 20 plus years of going shopping and just kind of maybe just taking things just because they're there, which I know because I used to do that, just going into the shop, and they'll rearrange the supermarket, won't they? So they're very clever, whoever they are, the managers of the supermarkets. I'm sure they have lots of training in human desire, how to promote, how to help people to, enjoy all the different possibilities that they can find in the supermarket. So they'll rearrange them, at least in the UK, if they do that here, rearrange them, so that you have your 5 items that you need, and you go in and it's like, I'm just going to get these 5 items. I'm frugal, I'm renounced, I just know what I need. And then you can't find what you need, but you find all these other things, and they just look really kind of interesting, actually. Maybe this would be good to try. And so, it's if we have money, we have a sort of agency, and we have many, many choices. And it's very lovely to be able to give that up, because then you can start looking at these things and seeing those impulses but not being able to sort of follow them. And, you know, we can see that we're easily, as human beings, we're very easily enticed by things shiny and colourful and whatever. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Because children, you can see that very clearly. And we give them toys that are really colourful and interesting and noisy, or things that move around when they hit them. And they just love that. And it's so fun to watch kids learning through playing with toys. Well, we're just the same, really. You know, and people know that. People in marketing and advertising, they know that. And they're trying to grab our attention and get us hooked, you know, get us interested in buying whatever it might be. I think it's quite interesting that a lot of food products and drink products are really brightly coloured and to grab our attention, to stand out from the rest. And we can only be aware of this and, you know, try and just notice that movement we'll have towards this, that, and the other. And, you know, be kind to ourselves, because we may well get caught up. But it's just really the practice is to notice, to see, and to practice it. The middle way is to be mindful of the push and pull, of all the sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches around us, and just to watch what we do with all of that, with kindness, not to judge ourselves, but rather to simply learn about these impulses, learn about our propensities, you know, and be willing to, be frugal and to let go. And for me, there's a kind of recognition that it may not be a rational, logical recognition, but nevertheless, a sense that, you know, the more I have, the less there is in the pool, in the pot for the whole. And the less I have, then the more there is. And I don't, that's not a logical thing, but I think there is something there. It's a helpful thought anyway, that in renouncing, I'm kind of giving. So it's like we're sharing. When we give something up, it's like, well, it's there for someone else. And I can, you know, appreciate this in monastic life, because that's really the case. It's like there's just this many clothes in the place, and you know, do I really need another pair of socks, or could somebody else use them? You know, so it's more obvious. But I think it's obvious. It's not so obvious, but it's also apparent in the wider field. And we can get caught up on money and finances. The whole economic system can be quite confusing for us, because, you know, if we're lucky enough to have a good education and have a good income, we can feel that we're entitled to that. And fair enough, you know, in a sense, if we work hard and so forth, yes, we're entitled in a way. But when we look at the wider field, we can see that many people don't have that kind of privilege. You know, they haven't had an education, and they may not have the economic kind of advantages that we have. And actually, the helpful, happy, skillful way to approach this is to share. Because if we're lucky enough to have, you know, what we need and maybe a bit more, then we can give away the extra, you know, and, you know, have an attitude of questioning, do I really need this? And so this kind of frugality, and again, it's not to be mean to ourselves at all. It's more like to be generous to others and to be kind of happy with what we have, to cultivate contentment. So this is really doable. So I think frugality, I think of it as a very positive quality. It's more like, what can I share? What can I leave in the pot for others, or even give to others? How much do I really need? And where's my happiness really to be found? What gives me joy? What gives me happiness? And it's usually things like, isn't it, a walk in the nature, which is free. It's the things that don't cost generally, isn't it? But really oftentimes give us the most joy. It's out of that system, basically, out of that system. There's a wonderful project called the Venus Project. A chap in Florida came up with the idea that we could all do much better if we didn't have any money in the world. There's no economic system. How much better we could live, how much more equitably we could live. And he's designed, I mean, he's a genius. This man, he's elderly now. He's designed all these beautiful cities, made little models of them. And it's like a whole system that he's just laid out. And it would work very beautifully, I'm sure, because it's a system where everybody shares the resources and everyone's welcome to them. So whatever you need to read, go to the library. You need some kind of, I don't know, bicycle or vehicle. Well, there's a garage over there. Just pick one up and then bring it back when you've finished, and so on. And most of the world that he envisages is nature, and it's cultivated as much as needed, and there's enough for everybody, and there's distribution of everything around the globe as needed. It's a utopia. It's heaven on earth. It's not happening. It probably never will. But, what a beautiful vision. And the crux of the vision is that there's no income for anyone. There's no money, so that people don't get divided by money. They don't have the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots, and that people work according to their inclination, according to their sense of service, their wish to contribute. And if you don't have that, well, that's fine. You can just sit and do nothing and still survive and still get what you need. But maybe in such a world, people would actually then feel motivated to offer something. And this is the sense he has, that if we're all equally valued, then we will value ourselves and want to offer, into the mix. So I love this. I love this vision, and it gave me a lot of inspiration when I learned about it. So the middle way, finding our way to balance, living a balanced life and having a balanced relationship to the resources around us. This is a way of avoiding conflict. And for sure, if we don't have rich and poor, privileged and underprivileged, then there's a lot less hatred and resentment, and theft and unhappiness in the field. So we can imagine this, and we can also live this, of course. So for each one of us, this is our agency, isn't it? It's what we do, how we live. That's all we can really work with, spend our energy trying to promote our own well-being and our own kind of way of harmonizing with the world around us. So in action, in attitude, and then speech, and in this sutta, this exposition of non-conflict, the Buddha talks a lot about speech, and he says some really interesting things. And one thing he says is not to extol, praise, or disparage others in any way. This is a cause of conflict when we do this. And I find that really interesting. And he also says, when we're speaking on Dhamma, not to personalize the teachings. And we talk a lot, Sanghamitra and I, about the Pali. We've been looking at Pali language, doing bits of translation every day. And it's so interesting that in the Pali language, there isn't really very much use of the pronouns, the she, he, they, I, you. In terms of sentence structure and in terms of the teachings, they're very objectively given. So qualities are discussed, qualities that could be cultivated, qualities to be let go of. So it's a really interesting kind of shift in terms of language. In the Pali language, this is a given. So the whole culture or sort of mentality behind that language is one of impersonal, looking at things in an impersonal way. And this is so in tune, of course, with the Buddha's teachings on not self. So it's very helpful to translate, to look at the Pali Because when we translate into English and probably many other languages, inevitably the sense of persons comes in. For instance, loving kindness is a valuable quality to cultivate. Becomes, you should practice loving kindness. This kind of thing. It's just a very crude example. But it's really interesting to observe that in the Buddha's teachings, he doesn't single out people, individuals. He speaks about qualities. And I think that's such a helpful pointer for us because, in the world, when unfortunate things happen, there are two ways in which we respond. To me, something like there was a little tornado nearby yesterday. I was just hearing about that. So a tornado comes, and generally something like that, we're not actually trying to find someone to blame. We're just accepting, oh my goodness, something really unfortunate happened for some people over there. There was this weather issue that was very damaging. Gosh, and the mind just goes to compassion generally, just straight to compassion. It's like, oh, that's so unfortunate. The other way that the mind can go is if something happens, it could even be a tornado, actually, come to think of it. We might start to think somebody's to blame. We might actually do that nowadays. We might think we're to blame. We're to blame. Human beings are to blame. The weather's all changed because of us. And all the weather we have now, it's no longer natural. It's human-made. It's our fault. We could even go to that, to the second way of thinking in terms of weather nowadays, but certainly in terms of human activity, in terms of war, in terms of conflict. We can tend to point the finger. It's quite natural to do that. We have a sense that people who drop bombs on other people, well, they shouldn't do that. That's wrong. It's just simple, really. Don't hurt and harm other people for any reason at all. But what's interesting is that this tendency to point the finger and to feel blameful and judgmental is actually big suffering for us. So it's just noticing that. It's like the two arrows the Buddha spoke about, the arrow that's pain in the heart, pain in the body. This is the first arrow. It's a simple reality. There is pain. But then when this happens for us, we can jump to the next arrow. The second arrow is the thinking about it that happens. Why is it painful? Why is this happening? If it's a physical pain, what's wrong with me? What's going to happen to me if I got cancer? Where's it come from? Why have I got this? It's very natural for us to bring the second arrow in. And then in terms of events in the world, it's almost immediate. The second arrow comes along. We start thinking about why things are happening. How could they be happening? Who's to blame? And in the heart, there can be a lot of reactivity that's activated. All of this is natural. There's nothing wrong with any of this, but it's just noticing the Buddha's teaching. There's suffering and there's a way out of suffering. So we want to focus on that aspect. What's really relevant, what's really important for us. So the tornado or the wars. Okay, how do I relate to this? What is the middle way? What is the way to relate to the world that's non-conflicting, not causing conflict here, and therefore, as a result, not causing conflict outside, around, not adding, to the conflict in the world. And it's a really tall order for us often. But if we want to really apply, the Buddha's teachings in our lives, we have all these opportunities again and again, like every day. There's opportunities almost every moment. Because as soon as we observe suffering, the real practice is, can we just stay with that? Just let that be the reality that it is. So I read the news, I hear things, boom, there's pain in the heart. Some people have suffered, some shocking experience due to weather nearby even, and certainly all around the world. This is happening. People are suffering because of human activity, real sort of institutionalized hatred in the world that's constantly playing out for so many people who are less privileged than we are. And, so knowing all these things, there's nothing wrong with knowing these things. There's nothing wrong with tuning into the world around us, because we can learn from it, because this is Dhamma, this is the way it is. But how we relate is really crucial. And we can use this either for more suffering and more conflict in our lives, in our minds, in our hearts, or we can actually use all the input, all the information, all the happenings that we perceive around us for liberation here and now. And this is something amazing and wonderful. So the Buddha's teachings are always relevant, and the path of practice is always now. So it's, how do I relate? I feel what I feel. Feel what I feel. Notice the reaction. Notice the impact of whatever I hear about, whatever I feel, here in the body, here in the heart, and let that be the truth that it is in this moment. And meditate. And meditate doesn't mean necessarily come to a meditation session or go into the meditation room in the house, if you have one, or space where we meditate, sit down. No, it means right now, meditate on this. Stay steady with what's felt and just really allow that to be the reality for us. And when we do that, of course, we can't really move into the second arrow. We can't move into proliferation, really, imagination, really, as to what's the cause of this and why and how. We can't really know these things. We can have a sense of knowing them, but we can't be sure that we're right. We can't really know the bigger picture. We can't really fully understand the causes of things. And so when we try to understand, or we feel that we understand, then we generally get into imagining and proliferation. We're off, we're spinning, or obsessing. And it's really helpful to ourselves and to everyone around us if we can pull back from that and just feel what we feel. Because in feeling the suffering of the world around us, we're actually doing something very valuable, which is to allow it to change. This is where transformation happens. It's the only place, the only way in which transformation can happen is if people are willing and able to feel the pain of what's happening around us. And in that, we're purifying our own hearts, because we're letting go of reactivity. We're not adding, we're not jumping on the bandwagon. We're not rolling around with everyone else in samsara. We've stepped off the wheel and we're witnessing, we're observing and we're learning from the reality of how it is. Wisdom arises. And this is something that we can offer. We can offer for ourselves. We can then, whatever is going on within and around us, we can have a sense of well-being. There's nothing that can shake that if we're present, if we're mindful, if we're really practicing the Buddha's teachings. No, that's completely unshakable. But we can certainly bear witness and be present for what's happening around us in such a way that we're offering wisdom and peace. So to be able to, you could say on a personal level, to be able to not react when things are difficult things happen. In terms of conflict, some aspect of conflict enters our world. to be able to not react, to be able to not necessarily forgive, although forgiveness is part of this, but just to be present. If we're present with, say, somebody's abused me, somebody's offended me, somebody's insulted me, somebody's hurt me, to be able to not lash out, not give back what's been given, the ability just to be present with the pain of what's just happened is to forgive in a way. It's not to retaliate. And in this way, we're really adding peace into the world. And for a person who abuses another and doesn't have a battle on their hands, that's a gift. It's a gift for them, and they can reflect on what's been done, and maybe that peace can come towards them, and they can have a chance to reflect and consider the suffering with them, that's with them. So, to be able to cool down, keep cooling down, where there's heat, where there's fire, to be able to just have an ability to not add fuel to the flames, not add to the heat, but to offer coolness, peace. We can do this. It's not at all beyond our reach. All we have to do is be mindful in the moment. If we can give priority to that, then we're going to behave in ways that are promoting, peace and harmony. And so in this sutta, the Buddha speaks about how we manifest. So in our actions, right action, that is harmless action. And in our speech, not to personalize, not to point fingers, not to, not to judge and blame anybody for anything that's happening in the world around us that is harmful, destructive, even evil. No, to not to personalize is to see that there are certain qualities that lead to harm. There are qualities that have suffering as a result. Qualities like greed, qualities like hatred, aversion, ill will. These qualities, we can see the result of these qualities, if they are nourished, they will go into actions, go into speech, and cause tremendous harm in the world. And these are the qualities we want to face up to. We want to work towards their diminishment, And we can see that, all the hurt and harm in the world is due to these qualities. These qualities are our enemies. If anything's our enemy, there's no body who's an enemy, but there are these very painful qualities. How can we diminish these qualities in the world? Well, okay, let's see where I can find them here. Because, if I have an issue out there with something that's happening, I can be pretty sure that there's something in here that is actually the cause of that. There's something in here that's the cause of my disquiet over there. When I look over there, this is how it is. If we didn't have hatred, ill will, animosity, greed in our hearts, we really wouldn't find it an issue. We wouldn't be shaken by the events around us. So it's an opportunity for us, isn't it, to reflect. It's like a hall of mirrors we're in. You see something over there that's really, I'm having a strong reaction to this. This is not okay. So just let that mirror reflect here and see what's going on. There's something here that's not okay, that's for sure. And this is my work. This is what I can do profitably. I can profitably put my energy and effort and time into examining what's happening here. And this is making peace. And then the peace can, mirror back. So this is our work, and there's always work to be done. And it's a constant practice. And so this mindfulness, this meditation is really a continuous practice for us through our lives. Every time we react to anything, boom, okay, what's going on? What's going on? How can I attend to this? And to attend to it is to attend with kindness. Oh, they're suffering. Oh, suffering. Let me see if I can really bear witness to this. What do I feel? What's being felt? What's happening? Just breathing it in, breathing it out, and just observing the pain and suffering, the disquiet, the dis-ease, and then it has a chance to disentangle itself and come to peace. It will pass away, in short. Anything that arises passes. And if we're able to lend our attention to that process, then we can really witness that fully and see the end of suffering. See the end of suffering here, and then we can extend that to the world around us. So through our speech, in this sort of the Buddhist said, don't let your speech be personal. Don't pick on, don't pick out, don't personalize. So I think that's something really interesting for us to consider, because everything we hear about the human world is personal. It's this one and that one, and we're who's responsible? So it's just interesting for us to consider that the Buddha was really encouraging us to direct our attention away from that kind of way of thinking to something much more universal, the universal Dhamma, the universal laws, that greed and hatred are the cause of suffering, confusion, ignorance are the cause of suffering, nothing else. And this to focus on this is to really have a sense of agency and a sense of almost like we know what to do. We know how to work with these things. As is within, so is without. It's the same. Also to use our speech in such a way we can really offer through our speech ways to diffuse conflict, ways to offer peace into the world, harmonious speech that is beneficial, speech that is true and correct, but also beneficial. And we can consider this. So this is an amazing thing. This is an amazing work for us because, goodness me, we're communicating all the time. And how much of what we say is promoting peace and harmony and forgiveness and well-being, and how much is adding it to the suffering that we feel. And we can just observe these things because it's, sometimes we can just find ourselves saying things when there's a feeling of disquiet in the heart, like we're expressing our suffering, basically. And we just have to be very conscious of that, because when we express our suffering, then we're giving it to another person. Here you go. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Like sometimes that's really valuable and useful. If we're talking with a friend and we're telling them the ways in which we're struggling and suffering, this is almost, you could say, like a gift. It's a gift of Dhamma, because then we can explore and come to an understanding of what's going on together. But we just have to be careful, don't we, who we express our suffering to. And are they ready? Is this the right time for them? Can we make a kind of agreement that actually I'm just going to offload at the moment. I just need to share this with you. Can you help? In this case, this can be really skillful. So we're sharing our burden and we're allowing others to help, and we're allowing everyone to learn something about suffering here. Then we can know that in other situations where we're expressing suffering, it may be that actually it's not the right time for the other person. They've got something else going on, or we may not even be seeking help or to explore the Dhamma, but rather just, boom, I can't cope with this. I'm overwhelmed. Boom, out it comes. And we can tell the difference. So we can consider these things and consider how we can kind of monitor our speech. It's worth reflecting, like on what I've said, on what I'm about to say, what I have said, what I'm going to say, all these different ways in which we can consider speech. And we generally, personally, I'm not very good at this, Like, do I think before I speak? Rarely. boom, out it comes. So it's really like so helpful to actually have a pause before speaking, if we can. It's a bit of a job, but to actually have that slight moment before we actually say something. How often would we not speak if we did that? I think I'd be a much quieter person. And that would be good. That would be really good, and more of a listener. Because actually when we can reflect, it is often the case, isn't it, that a lot of, personally anyway, what I say is often better left unsaid. And then, there's more quiet, and there's more receptivity maybe to what's going on around us. So we have different personalities. Some people are naturally wonderfully quiet and receptive, and peaceful. And they just like that. They have that. That's such a gift. For others, it's like, okay, can I just put the brake on a little bit? Can I just hold back slightly? Oh, it's really difficult. But we can consider these things. Consider how the Buddha said, it's really good to reflect before we speak. Is this worth saying? Is this true, correct, and beneficial? And is this the right time? So we can just bring that in if we ever have a chance, as often as possible. And then as we're speaking, can we be mindful as we're speaking? And sometimes we can be in the middle of saying something and have a thought of, actually, this isn't really going in a very good direction. I'm a bit annoyed with you, and I'm beginning to express that now. Maybe I'll just stop. And we can do that. And I always find it really uplifting when people are in the middle of something and then they'll say, actually, no, I'm going to just stop now. I always think that's so laudable. So do. Good for you. You're practicing restraint. Oh, you've got the mindfulness that even in this moment, this moment of the flurry of speech, you're able to actually assess what's happening and put the brake on. Wonderful, wonderful. And then come back to what's actually happening. Calm down. That's really amazing when people can do that, when we can do that. And then after speaking, also to be able to reflect on what has been said. And I find this really helpful. Like when we meditate at the end of the day, to meditate at the end of the day is so good because the mind will quite naturally kind of review, oftentimes, if there's anything that's a cause of remorse or regret, it will tend to come up. I don't know if you notice that. I notice that. It'll be right there. All we have to do is stop and meditate, make some time, and it will be right there because that's a knot that's just been created. And so it's the first one that needs to come undone for us. So anything I've said, that's a cause of harm or upset for myself or for the other person, then I can really learn from that experience. And again, we don't need to add the secondary. We don't need to judge and blame ourselves. That's a waste of time. No, it's more like, look at that. Oh, yeah. There's something there. I want to move away from that behavior. I want to let go of that way of relating. And so we can. So we do through this witnessing, through this awareness. So these are just a few words about the sutta, which I recommend reading. The Exposition of Non-Conflict, Majjhima 139. I'll stop here.
Sadhu, 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 anumodami.